I've got two handouts here. One is Kentucky Potters and Potteries from the 19th century, actually 1790 through 1900. And this is something we put together in 97 when we did a symposium and exhibit at Hackley Museum in Paris. And we had a little symposium with the MESDA, the Museum of Southern MESDA, Museum of Early Southern Decorative Arts in Winston-Salem, funded for us, which was really pretty cool. And we had people from all over the country, actually, who came down from New York and various places, mostly New England, to find out what had happened in Kentucky. Because so often, you know, the Northerners don't think anything happens in the South. And so we were happy to let them know that something had happened. So this is the sort of comprehensive list of things that we knew about in '97 that we got on the list. There's some things that we sort of knew about but didn't get on the list too. And then this is the other list. This is all Madison County, and it doesn't include all of the various associations. There were people like the Grinsteads and Huffman and Griggs, who was actually a mill operator and entrepreneur more than anything else. And but it includes most of the ones that we know that actually mark their pots with their names on them. So these are the pots that you're more likely to find out in the field, and they'll have their name or some combination of these names on the pots, and so it makes it a little bit easier to identify them. So anyway, there are those. Pass those around. And what I've done is, I think everything here, the stuff from my collection, and I've asked Speedy and Jerry to bring in some things from their collections to sort of augment the various potters, so that you get an idea of some of the forms that were made over and over and over again. So anyway, I put this together in sort of a chronological order as best we know about what happened here in the county, who arrived first, and what they were doing at the time. The earliest potter that we know about, I can't remember his name, there's a great story in several of the Kentucky histories about this guy who's French, who's a potter. He was at Boonesborough, and at the siege of Boonesborough, after the siege of Boonesborough, they find him hidden underneath one of the beds in one of the blockhouses at Boonesborough. And basically, they drag him out, and he says, "Well, you know, I'm a potter. I'm an artist. I'm not a fighter." Apparently, he'd gotten himself into something he didn't quite know what he was getting himself into. He crossed the Appalachians and into the wild and woolly West, and the Indians started shooting at him. There's apparently there are several of those accounts of that his having been dragged out from under his bed, and we're working on a little. Jerry and I have been talking for years about working on a book, and eventually we'll get something together. It would be great, I think, to have all those accounts in that book and how various people saw that account and how they recorded from that time. I think it would be interesting to hear about. But the people that we know for certain, and at this point, the archaeologists have found no evidence of Boonesborough of anybody making pottery there. There is, you know, you assume that there's a potter in the building. He may or may not have made pots there. He may have turned it and gone back to Virginia or Pennsylvania, wherever it was he came from, after the Indians shot Arizona. But so far they haven't. There is evidence of some European pottery that was brought in to Boonesborough. They found shards and that kind of thing, but they have not found anything that looks like it was actually produced at Boonesborough. Not to say that it won't happen eventually, because a lot of the digging around Boonesborough is pretty minimal at this point compared to what they've done in other parts of the state and various other historic locations. The potters in Madison County that have the best documentation about being here early are the Grinstead brothers. And they were they marked their pot, the one that marked his pots with the Grinstead name was J.P. Grinstead, John Parker Grinstead. And he was known as Parker Grinstead. He went by his middle name. And frequently you'll find some of his pots are marked PG, like this one's marked PG. These two are marked J.P. Grinstead. And then his brother, Matthew D. Grinstead, no one's found anything with the Matthew D. Grinstead mark. But there are pots that are marked Griggs and Grinstead. Now, Lucian T. Griggs was a mill owner and entrepreneur who lived at Waco. His house is still standing on the old College Hill Road as you turn at the intersection of downtown Waco, head north on College Hill Road. This is that first white Gothic Revival house on your right as you're begin to go up the hill there. Still standing. There's a really nice picture of him in the archives. I think it's in Richmond at the EKU of him and his wife. They have no children, and a black woman. Probably I think this is after the Civil War, but they're standing in front of the house, and so it's a really great document of him and his property at the time. He had a woolen mill at the crossroads in Waco. He also had a grist mill in the vicinity. He also had a general store there as well. So he was very much centered in Waco. Griggs was. And so when we're, in some of the accounts that we haven't been able to absolutely verify this, but some of the oral histories say that Matthew D. Grinstead partnered up with Griggs and was the Grinstead and Griggs and Grinstead. And so you have Griggs is the entrepreneur and the salesman, and then you have the potter who's kind of working with them. And so they're both putting their names in the pottery. This pot, it's interesting to see these pots in comparison to some of the other pots. These guys came down from Virginia down through the Great Valley, in the Shenandoah Valley, and then crossed into Kentucky through the Cumberland Gap. There's evidence of them being in southern Virginia just before they moved to Kentucky. And so we think that that's how they arrived in Kentucky. And so they may have been trained in Virginia. We're not sure at this point, but they were most likely were. And so their style is somewhat different. You get this one is a little warped because it worked in the kiln. It got really hot and worked in the kiln. But you see the lip on this is very different than some of the lips on the other pots. This form is similar to the other jugs. Some of the other jugs you see, but the spout is very different. It's not straight at the top, and it doesn't have a line that these other pots that were made by the German potters came later. And then also the clay is a little different too, slightly different. It's probably hard for the people who aren't that deeply immersed in pottery to see that somehow the clay is a little bit different than some of the other pottery. Parker was also a preacher, and he ended up in Jamestown, Kentucky, that is west of Somerset, and on the north side of what is now Lake Cumberland. That's where Jamestown is. And he was a preacher there from, I think, sometime in the 1850s until he passed away, probably. He died in, we don't know, and probably the reason we don't know is that none of us, our small circle of people, have been down there to find out that he has a grave in Jamestown and check out the other records down there to find out. And then we do that Matthew D. Was born in 1814, died in 1890. And I think he's buried at the Flatwood Cemetery. And then, okay, so that's sort of the beginning of it all. In 1847, a guy named Phil Emmett Huffman arrives from Bourbon County. His father had been a redware potter in Bourbon County from about 1790. and he learned to make pots in Virginia. And but there's only evidence of him having made pottery in Bourbon County. They dug some of the kiln sites. There are shards. Nothing is marked, but there is that evidence. The sort of paper trail has it pretty well associated with Bourbon County. Huffman, we don't know where Huffman became acquainted with salt glazed pottery. This higher fired stoneware, more durable kind of pottery. They both were of German extraction. John Huffman was born in Virginia, but his family was from Germany originally. and they maintained the German connection into the mid-19th century and brought a couple of other potters to America. Huffman, the Huffman saga is pretty interesting because they were very entrepreneurial. He ended up making pottery in Waco for only 10 years, but in that amount of time, he came in with his wife. There's an account of him coming in with his wife and kids in Bourbon County. They built a kiln, a pug mill, a place to actually turn the pottery, sheds with roofs over them for drying the pottery, and set up a major kind of concern. My feeling is that besides himself, he probably also had other people help him turn pottery, but we don't have names to prove that at this early stage. Anyway, in that 10-year time, he acquired something in the order of 1,000 to 1,500 acres of land in various tracts over a period of time. And there's an account of him. I forget if it's I think it's in the French Tippin papers at EKU. We have him loading up flatboats on the river and with pottery and taking it. I don't know why the account says that the river was low, and I'm not sure what that has to do with them. Maybe they were actually pulling the barge up the river rather than actually, I don't know how they would be, otherwise how they would be pushing it up the river. But anyway, he was going up to urban and beyond and trading pottery for coal and then bringing coal back down the river, and they were taking the coal with oxen up the river back up to Waco to fire the kilns. And so he apparently was using this on an annual basis during the warm months when the river was low to cycle of selling pottery and buying coal to fire his kilns. The earliest things would have been fired with wood, of course. You can actually see the wood ash on this particular piece. Fly ash would have developed on this. You see a little bit of wood ash on some of these. And that would have been in the early stages of firing the kiln. You started out with wood, and then you got it up to a really high temperature. Then you could throw in the coal to intensify the heat, raise the temperature higher. So it's a combination of the two things that they were using. Generally speaking, coal-fired pottery is going to have a sort of darker gray color to it because it puts off a lot of carbon into the atmosphere. The carbon gets absorbed into the clay, and so you don't get as bright a white kind of gray surface as you do with this more wood-fired kind of pottery. Huffman also, like I said, he had contacts with Germany, and he convinced a guy named Valentine Baumstark to come to Waco and make pottery for him. He became his foreman primarily. And Baumstark had been taught to make pottery in Europe. He's, by most accounts, he came from Baden-Baden, although in some accounts he's claiming it's not Germany, it's actually Switzerland. But it's apparently on that border. And during this 19th century period, there was a lot of warring and fighting in Europe, and so probably from one year to the next, they didn't know what country they were actually in, and because there were these squabbles all along the borders in that part of the world. But anyway, he went through the guild system, and so he was probably apprenticed at the age of 10 or 12 years old, and at the time he was 16 years old, working with a professional potter. He would have known everything he needed to know about pottery to go out on his own and make pottery on his own. So anyway, this is Baumstark's work on this table. This from here to here, this is all Huffman stuff. And Baumstark arrives, actually this is Huffman. Yeah, sorry. This one is before I get to Baumstark, the story here is that when Baumstark arrived in Madison County, the only post office near what became Waco was Oggs Mill. And Oggs Mill is just about a mile or so, was just about a mile from where Crossroads in Waco is today. And so, since that was the post office, the place that people would know about, he actually stamped his pots with Oggs Mill at that point. For 3 years, there was a post office at that site before it was then moved to what later became Waco. There are only about 3 of these pots that we know of that are marked Oggs Mill out there. There's this one. I had another one, a straight-sided crock that I sold to Bob No that went to Stevens. And apparently there's another one that Bob knew about this in rather poor condition. It's out there something. This one you can actually tell again, if you look at it closely, you can see the fly ash on the surface on the top part of the pot. So this was definitely burned with wood. Okay, Valentine Baumstark. Baumstark arrives in 1850, and I didn't finish the story about Huffman. Huffman in 1857, after he'd been in Waco for 10 years, leaves for Texas. And Huffman named Waco after Waco, Texas. And it's unclear whether or not he had just heard rumors of Waco, Texas, and thought that was a great name, and he wanted why, or if he'd actually been to Waco at some point and came back to Kentucky, and then his goal for that 10 years he was in Waco was to get out of Kentucky and go to Texas. But he goes from here, having named Waco, Kentucky, and he goes to Waco, Texas. His father goes with him, or precedes him, we're not sure which. John Huffman, the redware potter from Bourbon County, also goes to Texas around the same time. And so they end up in Texas and become quite successful. Apparently, Huffman never makes another pot after he goes to Texas. He sold all of his land in Kentucky. He arrives out there with a good stake and buys up a lot of land and starts raising cattle. And then later on, he becomes a meat packer in Fort Worth and Galveston, and shipping meat out from Galveston to Europe and Lord knows where at that point. He becomes quite wealthy. His son, I think it was it was Walter, I think. Walter Grinstead, or Walter Huffman, was actually had the Fort Worth Gazette newspaper. And when Green Clay went to Texas in the 1880s, Walter, I think I got that right, let me check. I want to say, well, I'm a little fuzzy on that. But anyway, the son of PA, Phil Huffman, owned this newspaper. And at that time, when Green Clay ends up in Texas, he's worth $300,000, and which is an enormous amount of money for that time. By the time he died, about 4 or 5 years later, he was worth $1 million in 1880-some dollars. And Lord knows what that would be today. It would probably be like Bill Gates, a billionaire. And he owned the newspaper. He owned several other enterprises in town, including general merchandise type stores, that kind of thing. So they did quite well for themselves after leaving Madison County. Anyway, and then to von Stark. Von Stark arrives in 1850 and basically takes, when Huffman leaves, von Stark takes over the production. And my theory is, because there's so much Huffman stuff out there, you find a lot more Huffman probably than anybody else. Yeah?
I'm sorry, which von Stark were you speaking of, John or Valentine? Taking over from Huffman?
Oh, Valentine. Valentine von Stark. Valentine von Stark takes over from well, actually, he's the foreman for Huffman. And we think he's probably taken or becomes the, or buys Huffman out probably at some point. And is making, in the meantime, Huffman reports that von Stark trained most of the potters in the area who's still around, still in the region, including, we suspect he probably trained or the early Cornelius family members as well. But anyway, von Stark, like I say, he came up in the guild system. He's very proficient, very technically proficient. You can see the pottery from the Huffman things on tend to be really kind of controlled and precise in the way that they're actually turned, that kind of thing. The detailing is very, very careful. And also the firing seems pretty consistent too. You don't find a lot of junky pieces with things stuck to them where pots collapsed onto one another, that kind of thing. Either they were very good about throwing out the seconds, or there just weren't that many seconds to begin with. I'm not sure which, but probably the German. They were very thorough one way or the other. They got rid of the mistakes. It didn't make them to begin with. Let's see. Valentine von Stark continues to make pots on into the, well, he dies in 1885. He's only 60 years old when he dies. He arrived with, interestingly enough, there's a family connection here in the county. There's some pictures of him. There's a great picture of him and his wife here with he has a top hat on, which is kind of interesting. And he arrived with a portable organ that he was known to take around from house to house and play. Speedy, you've seen this in this lady's house in Madison County.
What did you say? Take the house and play what?
It was a portable organ. It was like a keyboard kind of organ thing, but it wasn't a gigantic floor piece, but it was a small and portable thing that he could take around from place to place. He brought that with him from Europe. Anyway, it was interesting that he had kept that sort of connection with Europe. And then after after Huffman leaves in 1860, von Stark's nephew Dennis Zettel arrives and works. In the beginning, he works with Valentine von Stark, but then later on, he goes out on his own and starts his own pottery. And Dennis Zettel. Oh, do we have Zettel back there someplace? Yeah, bring that up here, Jerry.
How did Dennis find his way from town to Waco?
Well, actually, I was reading about that, and it turns out that story about Zettel was not, it was actually about von Stark. Von Stark arrived in Richmond, Kentucky, and there was a guy in town there. Von Stark couldn't find his way around because he didn't know any English. And he knew enough English to say, I've got to get to Waco. But, and it turns out he bumps into this guy in Richmond who was from Waco, and the guy puts him on his horse and slaps the horse on the backside. The horse knows his way back to Waco, and that's how he arrives in Waco. And the woman, or actually the daughter, I think, of the guy who whose house he was going to ends up being his wife eventually. That's the story that's in, I think, again, it's in the first page, which is kind of a fun tale. Again, so you can see how similar these are. These are both churns, very similar kind of form, almost identical profiles, a little bit different, slightly different shaping, but it's amazing how close they are. One of the things that we think happened a lot in Madison County is that these guys were working for one another. Somebody would get an order, and they'd say, "Oh my goodness, I got an order for 50 or 100 churns and some other stuff. I got to have it out by this date. Can you help out? Can you come over and turn some pots for me?" And I think that's kind of what happens because you see these kind of things consistently happening. It's hard to say sometimes that some of these aren't done by the very same hand. When you see the detailing, the handles, the way they're attached, the kind of way that the lips are finished, and those kind of things. It's sort of hard to say that hasn't happened. But Huffman reports on Valentine Baumstark that he was the guy who actually trained, he says, dozens of apprentices, potters in the area before he retired. So that could also be true, and it could be that he was just one of these really kind of controlling, detailed kind of German guys who made sure everybody made things precisely alike. It's that kind of thing. There is something about that, I suppose. But anyway, Zettel continues to pot into the 20th century. He died in 1906. And I brought in, you've seen this before, one other time. He made this little presentation picture for his daughter, Nora, made by V. Zettel for his daughter, Nora, in his 70th year, Waco, Kentucky, 1906, the year he died. So, kind of interesting. And it's also interesting, too, that at this point, we're getting in from salt glazed pottery. We're getting into the Albany slip glaze period, where the Albany slip clay that they use is Albany slip is a clay that you can apply on the outside of a pot, take it up to Stoneware temperatures, and it melts and becomes a glaze without any additional. You can flux it down to a lower temperature by putting in some kind of soda, salt, or some sort of like baking soda type stuff, or borax, and you can flux it down to a lower temperature, and it will create a glaze. But it had to be imported from Albany, New York. That was the only source for Albany clay, was Albany, New York. So it wasn't until the 1880s or after, and I think in Kentucky it was probably closer to 1900, that you began to get this brown glazed pottery happening here. The reason that they used it was because they could line the inside of pots and make it shiny and more sanitary, easier to clean out than a rough sort of inside clay pot on the inside. Anyway, Zettel. And then the last 19th century potters, I'm thinking, it's the last one, were the Grinstead brothers, who started making pots probably about 1880, we think. It's their pottery is marked G.W. Grinstead and Brother, B.R.O. And it would be George W. Grinstead. And we think probably now, he had two brothers. It's a little bit in dispute for a while, but there's an account that a potter that keeps turning up in the accounts, and his name is Smith Grinstead, who's, I want to say he was older than George, but maybe that's wrong. But we think Smith was probably the one who's the brother of that twosome. These two are marked G.W. Grinstead, and this one is actually glazed with Albany slip on the inside and outside. And so at that point, we know that they were getting some Albany slip from New York State. And then we've got these pots here that we think, this one is marked Waco on the bottom. It's a molded piece, and it's glazed with Albany slip. And it's hard to say who made this. It could be a big pot like that. It doesn't even fit that one. But that would come pretty close. But this one would fit on top of something that was like this crock, or a straight-sided cake crock, or what they call a cake crock, like that one, straight-sided with a lid on top, and you'd actually bake a cake in it, put it in the fireplace, put poles around it to heat it up and make your cake. This one is interesting because the lid, the handle of the lid is recessed in, and so this was meant to be a lid for storage jar. This would have gone on top of something, and then you would have stacked your jars in your cellar, so you can get more things in your cellar. So you put your confit or your sauerkraut or your pickles or whatever in the pot, put your lid on, either seal it or not seal it, depending on what it was. Put a piece of fabric on top, tie it to the top, and well, actually you wouldn't tie on that. If you had a lid, you wouldn't be tying it. You'd probably be doing this with like pickles or kraut, and you would put this on top, and then you have, because it doesn't have a lid with a handle or a lifter in the middle, you put another pot straight on top and stack it up 3 or 4 high if you had to, that kind of thing. Also in this same group of stuff, we found these interesting, weird-looking things. They're like, they have a little area here cut out, and they were for stacking things in the kiln. You put this on top of a jug, and you put another jug on top of that, and another one on top of that, somewhere around here, and that kind of thing. And these are reusable. That's why they're so chewed up, and they've got like lots and lots of salt glazing over and over again on the outside, so you get that kind of thing happening. This is another one for a larger jug. And this one. The most interesting things to me that came out of there are these old fat lamp parts that were left. These are kind of busted up, but you can see that they had kind of a cup at the top, and they've got a saucer at the bottom and a handle. And they would have had a spout like a pitcher, and you would put a wick in there, and you would put some sort of fat in the top to burn. It could have been anything from lard, hog fat, most likely in these parts, something like that. And you put a wick in there, and that would be your light in the early years up here. It's interesting that all 3 of these are very similar in their design, and hope you can see them. And then, for me, a very interesting thing is this little cup that turned up as well. I've not seen a cup of this vintage in Kentucky anywhere else. It's interesting. It's kind of short, doesn't hold a lot. Probably meant for tea, something like that. But it's a really interesting design. Again, it's very similar to a lot of the same things. The detailing is very similar to the stuff that's happening in the larger pots. And then I brought a really great Isaac Thomas pot from Maysville. This was a churn about this tall that dropped out of my side of the door. I tried this afternoon. And this guy worked in Maysville. He was actually born in Kentucky in 1789 in a place called Nefford Station, which is between what is now Maysville and Washington, Kentucky. That little, Washington's up on the hill a few miles, a couple miles. Maysville's down on the river. And Nefford Station was nothing but a log building out in the woods at that point. He was born at that cabin. And they've actually preserved the cabin. It's in Washington today. And he was born there in 1789. He was listed as a potter in the I know he's in the 1820 census. Anyway, he's already a potter at that stage. Probably learned from his father. We don't know a lot about him from his father, but we know a lot about him because he's written up in one of the Maysville or Mason County histories. He lived to be 89 years old. He and his wife were married for 60-some years, and he was in the war of 1812. He pottered at least into the 1850s. He's listed as a potter consistently in the census records. The interesting thing is, to me the most interesting thing is that there are 4 Isaac Thomases, and 3 of them all lived in the same household at one point. And they're all related. One of them is father, son, grandson, and nephew. all Isaac Thomasons. And we think that at least the three father, son, and grandson were all potters, and probably making pots under that same Isaac Thomas name for at least into the 1850s or 60s. So it gets a little confusing who made what when. But we also know that there was an association between Thomas Mendel and the Thomas family. And Mendel, there were three Mendels that worked in Maysville at one time or another. This pot is marked Thomas and Mendel. And Mendel, one of the Mendels at least, worked in Frankfurt at one point. And so we know that they were moving around. One of the things that was also happening with Thomas is that he shipped things down the Ohio River. A lot of the stuff turns up in Mississippi and in that Mississippi Delta region, and they had merchants' names on it. So merchants were ordering pots from Isaac Thomas in Maysville, Kentucky, having it floated down the river to sell in their stores. It's one of the more interesting things that I found out recently. This pot is interesting too. If you'll notice, you can see the marks on the top here where they used one of these stackers to fire another pot on top of it, like that. And then I brought these last few things to show you how similar the clay is across Kentucky and what it looks like. This is a Thomas pot, an I. Thomas pot too, and this was another little storage crock of some sort. This would have been fired inside another pot. It's fired in the salt glaze kiln, but the salt didn't get to it, and that's why you get this dry surface. It's a little like, I don't know if you know the Yijing, frequently teapots that come out of China. They're this brown, generally brown color, unglazed. They're fired really high, and the clay is really vitreous and glass-like. And so you get this very similar kind of earthy kind of color with no defects whatsoever. This has a number of defects, including the rock inside of it, because it was more of a folky kind of thing. But the Chinese have refined, their clay may just be so refined to begin with, but they refine it down so that there are no imperfections in it at all. But a very similar kind of look to it. And then in the other end of the state, this pot was made by Clark, I forget his initials. They were father and son in Eddyville, Kentucky, and it's by W.B. Clark, Eddyville, Kentucky, about 1880, probably. And they probably were fairly short-lived. There are not a lot of things that are known by them. But we know that there was, like I say, father and son in that time period in that part of the state. And there were potters also in Brandenburg and Owensboro and out in Paducah, all on the river. You found potters happening up through there into the 1880s and all up to 1900 in that region. This lid is pretty interesting too. Talking about the other lids, this would have been turned up like this, and they would have flipped it over and tooled it to get the shape and the rim. And they would have turned the knob on the top of it, take a little piece of clay, put it on top, and then pull that up into the knob on this side. Very complicated kind of lid for this. Like I said, this would have been a cake. They call them cake crocks, and they probably did make cakes in them, but they probably also made beans and braised meats and vegetables and that kind of thing as well. Let me run down real quickly. What time is it? And we're running at 3 o'clock. When do we have to leave? Is it 3 o'clock? Okay, let me run down real quick to tell you what some of these things were used for. Of course, this is a storage pot. Jugs, you know, people would put whiskey in them. They would use sorghum, molasses, things of that sort. This large jug here at some time in the late 1900s, early 20th century, probably had some sort of asphaltum or something oily and black inside it. It was probably used for that at that point. Large crocks like this would have been used to store meat. Meat would have been cooked in small pieces, would have been put in here, and you would pour lard or beef, I guess you would use tallow, on top of it. And basically what you're creating is what the French call confit. And you put that in, seal it up, put fabric on the top, tie the top onto the top of this. I know this sort of thing went on, and my earliest experience with this was my grandmother, who died in 1955. My mother used to tell the story all the time about having to clean out the cellar. And in the cellar, after my grandmother died, and I didn't know how long they left this stuff in there, but it could have been 5 or 10 years for all I know. But this rancid meat in pots like this was still around. And I remember that they actually killed hogs when I was a wee child, and I'm sure that's when some of this stuff was put up. And they were still using that, even though they had refrigeration and stuff, they were still using that kind of preservation for some of the pork products as late as the 50s. This is in Virginia. I'm sure they were doing it here too. And then this is a milk crock. This would have been probably also doubled as just a bowl of some sort. But pots like this were frequently used in the cellar to keep your milk cool. You'd milk your cow, put milk in here, let it cool in the cellar, in the water. These were storage vessels. Again, it could double as a milk crock. It's got this nice rim here that you can easily tie a piece of fabric over the top of it. These are small storage jars. People call this sort of general form fruit jars a lot. This one does not, these do not have a lip that's made for wax and a metal lid. Now later on, late 19th century, early 20th century, they made them with a kind of seat for a metal lid. They pour wax in there and seal the things so they can seal the fruit or meat or whatever we were storing in there. These are also storage jars. Again, these three. They frequently small things they call butter crocks. They were used for all kinds of things like that. They were general kitchen pieces. Small joints like this were used for your table, probably in the kitchen, that kind of thing. If you had this much whiskey or anything, you couldn't easily use this in the kitchen, so you had to downsize it into something smaller. This is one of the largest of the Waco pots that we're aware of. Rarely, I think I've not seen another 10-gallon. I've heard of another 10-gallon Waco pot, but I've not actually touched one. So this is one.
Now, then make that, don't you have to have your hand down inside?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, turns on a wheel. This one would have been pieced in 2 pieces, though. You'd make the bottom part, you'd pull it up maybe this high, and then, well, actually what you do is make the top part first. You pull it up like this, and cut that off, and it'd be like a tube. You set that aside, then you turn another piece, pull it up this high, or maybe this high, like that. You put this one on top of it, you sort of smush them together, and then you get your arm in there and pull them all the way up like that. And you've got to have a long arm. I mean, I'm like up to my hip right here, and it takes somebody with enormous strength. Just lifting this thing. What does this thing weigh? Speed? Is it like 50 pounds or more? I mean, I've seen a guy in the South turn flower pots and 50-pound balls of clay. Now this guy he was actually a gorilla. But he was in his 60s when he did it. But he would throw down a 50-pound ball of clay and pull a pot not that big, maybe more like this high, all to get in one piece. And it's like, sort of makes your head swell because it's so crazy to see that happen. Frequently, pots this big are made in 3 pieces. You make these smaller cylinders that are thick, then you put one on top of the other, and you pull them all. Once you've got it sort of together, then you pull it together. The Kentucky pots are pretty thick, actually. Probably if they were much thinner than this, they would warp in the firing. There are pots in North Carolina that are made with much coarser clay, and they're probably half this thick. And they make them just as big as this, but they're something about the clay has more, they call it tooth. It has more structure to the clay and lets you stand up higher because of the kind of clay it is. Pots like this, again, storage things, storage pots. Again, storage. This is a churn. This would have had, probably originally this would have had a clay lid with a hole in the center of it, and then you put a dasher into it and make it clay. The lids get broken invariably, but you're taking it in and out, using it quite a bit. It'd be a churn, so you get a wooden lid made. So you continue to use your churn. Like I say, these are really great to see these two pots together. Again, just your for some reason jugs are, I've hung on to a lot of jugs because they're rarer than you would think. A lot of them ended up being tossed down privies and stuff. This one of these, I know it's in the privy. This one was done from the privy. You can actually see the line here where it's set under, this part was underground for a while, probably many years. And this is an interesting piece. This would be called a cream riser, very similar to the milk crock over there, except you've got a spout here. You've got a little handle so you can handle the thing and pour the cream off. You put this in your spring house in the cool water and let it set for however long it took for the cream to rise. And then you pour the cream off as you need it. Again, this one again has some sort of black stuff around the lip. I'm pretty sure it probably had some kind of tar or some nasty black stuff being stored in it at one point. They got used over and over again. This is Zettel. This one's interesting. Zettel has this big exuberant mark he puts on things. Dennis Zettel is usually the mark, the most common one. You see it quite a bit. This one though is the only one of these I've ever seen. And I've heard of others, but Dennis, it's called Zettel and Company, Waco, Kentucky. And if you look at one of those lists, it lists several different associations he had with other potters and different organizations, how he had organized the business, that kind of thing. This again, this particular form, you see all over the South, sometimes with a wider lip, and again they call them creamerizers for whatever reason. This is a bowl, kitchen bowl. This again is a churn with a lid with a dasher in it. And I think that's about it. Frequently these are called tobacco jars or snuff jars. There is a taller version of this. It's about as big as that, is round. And they're about this tall, a small lid, a small opening at the top with a little tiny lid if they have a lid. And they're frequently called snuff jars. But again, so much of this stuff did double duty, as depending on whatever you need. I mean, this is the frontier, in the early 19th century. You're talking. I mean, some parts of this state they're still fighting with the Indians, and so things got to be used however they get used. Anyway, I've yacked on for quite a long time. Any questions?
I have 3 questions.
Yeah.
How did you start collecting, and where have you found most of these things? In Kentucky or not?
Yeah, I found most of the stuff in Kentucky.
And how did you start collecting?
I found it as far away as Georgia and Virginia. Well, I used to be a potter. I went to grad school at UK, and actually I learned to make pots in Virginia at Virginia University, and came here to be a grad student in UK. And during the summer, I was supporting myself as a potter to make a little extra money a lot of the time. And I just like pot. I like the process. I like the look of the stuff. I like what it's about. Pretty much interested in the Japanese primitive Japanese stuff. I got interested in Jugtown from North Carolina very early on. And when I was at UK, we were doing salt glazed pottery at UK. And some of the other potters and I would go down south to visit. We discovered that there were some old time folk potters still working in the South. Lanier Meadows in Georgia, the Coles in North Carolina, the Browns in North Carolina and Georgia, and Earl Craig, Northern North Carolina, the last of the Western North Carolina potters. These people were they would go out and dig their own clay, make their own glazes. They would, in Craig's case, he would take broken up bottles, and he had this contraption on the creek that was running day and night because the water would pour into I forget exactly how it worked, but it was this thing that was pounding glass day and night on the creek. And it would just pulverize the glass, and then when it got to a sort of powdery form, he would mix it with a little bit of clay and some other ingredients and make his glazes. And then he was firing in a groundhog kiln with wood pine slabs that he was finding locally. And it was totally primitive. It's very almost medieval when you think about it. Just you go to these firings, and these flames would be shooting, 30 feet in the air out of the stacks of the kilns, and these things get up to 24 degrees, 100 degrees Fahrenheit, and so they're yellow hot, and it's very exciting. There's nothing like it. It's very primal thing, and I just became hooked on that. And then I like the look of it. I like the process.
I went to see the Dead Sea Scrolls the other day in Cincinnati, and I'm sure you others have. I just couldn't believe the pots and things they had. Huge.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah, those Mediterranean pots, some of the Mediterranean pots are just amazing. They're storing, olive oil and stuff in the pots in the stall.
They were huge.
It was really amazing.